In a world where talent is evenly distributed, but venture capital is concentrated in coastal silos, smart startup money is heading for the Midcontinent. Welcome to the Midcon Markup, a podcast that uncovers the inspiring stories of our visionary tech entrepreneurs and the investors who believe in them. I'm your host, Cody Merrill with Cortado Ventures. Listen, learn, and make your Midcon Markup. Welcome to another episode of Midcon Markup. Today, fortunate to be here with Brandon Stokes.
Hey.
So, Brandon, why don't you tell us what you're currently working on?
I'm currently working the CEO of Buyable. So Buyable, in the short form, provides low interest rate auto loans, prime rate auto loans to first-time car buyers. First-time car buyers typically are subjugated to subprime rate auto loans, 18, 20%, and we're able to come at much lower prime rates in today's market. That's what we do in a nutshell, but the behind the scenes and how that happens is much more complex than that.
Okay, great. Well, can you provide a little bit more context on why you're working on this problem, how you understand the market, and just what the general pain point is for dealers, banks, and car buyers?
Yeah, that's the tricky thing about this business is there's like three people that you have to solve cases for, right? That you solve the needs for: banks, dealers, and buyers. So my background's in banking. I started out in investment banking. During that time, I actually invested in co-own a car dealership. So I understood, one, what the bank's needs were with auto loans. Also understood kind of what it takes to operate a car dealership. And at a dealer level, we're only as good as the financing partners that we have. And then when our customers started coming to our dealership and trying to get cars, they had issues getting loans, which hurt us selling cars. And so kind of that led me down the path of like, okay, our revenue and our sales are hurting because the lenders aren't lending to car buyers, especially ones that have thin credit or no credit or first-time car buyers. There has to be others having the same impact. And so that's what started me down this quest of building a Buyable. And the problem we're trying to solve and the problem that we're solving is like enabling large prime banks to lend to first-time car buyers, people with thin or no credit score, and then also be able to help dealers like myself close those type of sales, right? You have a customer walk in, you're really excited, you got to think sales about to get done and closed. Next thing you know, you can't find financing for them, helping them close the type of sales. And then just really enabling car buyers who have thin credit scores and no credit scores, get in a great deal instead of having to be subjugated to a subprime bank, giving them 18, 20%. They should be allotted a fair shot at their first car. We're involved in most consumers' first major purchase, which is a car, and allowing them to get a good deal on that is important for us. And I think that's kind of what drives and motivates us.
So what percentage of potential car buyers walking into a lot are relevant to your business solution?
Yeah, I would say about 14% of car buyers that welcome to a lot are kind of in that first-time car buyer situation. And then for the numbers for first-time car buyers are atrocious. So, with the average interest rate for first-time car buyer being around 18% in today's market, and we're starting to see almost up to 40% of those either get declined altogether, or just be subjugated to interest rates above 20%. So that's kind of where our sweet spot is like, hey, those kind of one out of every 7 borrowers that come in the lot, we can provide a solution for that. In other markets, like where we're at it in dealerships out in Nashville, very college town. There's 7 universities there. So a lot of kids are graduating, getting their first job, wanting their first car. And at one point it was like 1 out of every 3 for us. We're having issues getting financing for. So, it can vary depending on the market.
And from an impact component, how important is it for a family to have access to reliable auto transportation?
Yeah, in most households, the car payment is the second largest payment they're making every single month outside of their rent or their mortgage. And so, and also in America, we're not really there's not a lot of public transportation. So most people would rely on cars to get to from work, pick up their kids from school, get groceries, right? Because we use credit, and credit works for wonders for a lot of people, but for a large population, it doesn't. Then, those people have 2 options. They can either buy a car cash, and you don't have a lot of money, then you have to buy a pretty cheap, crappy, unreliable car, which means that you're going to suffer that car breaking down, which could actually hurt getting your kids to school, getting a job that can provide money for your family, getting groceries, things like that, right? Or if you do want to buy a car that is reliable, you're going to be paying $800, $900, $1,000 on like a really old crappy car, right? And so for us, it's like, how do we work with lenders, work with dealers in order to put people into reliable wheels at an affordable price? And in today's market, when prices are high, rent's high, inflation is high, right? It's even hurting consumers even more now when it comes to high interest rates. So we just want to be able to put the kind of best option in front of the borrower to help them get into a reliable car they can afford.
Good, great. Well, because we're both founders, I could not help myself from immediately hopping into the weeds, but usually I also like to ask about your background, your upbringing. Mm-hmm. Where did you grow up?
Yeah.
What did you want to be?
Yeah.
When you grew up?
Yeah.
What did you study? And then how has your career progressed to lead up to this point, to making this decision that you feel like you're uniquely qualified to found this startup?
Yeah. One, I've always been an entrepreneur. So I started my first quote unquote business when I was 9 years old. I was in an apartment complex, and I was, playing by the mailboxes, and this old lady asked me to take her trash out for her, and she'd give me $1. And so at the building that I was living in, all of the older people tended to stay at the top. I don't know why that was, but probably because they had nicer units. So then the older people had a little bit more money, so they had apartments at the top. And so I took the trash out, and then she would ask me again, can you do little errands for her, like maybe run to the store in the corner or whatever, and give me money. And I was like, I wonder how many other people kind of need this help. And so other old people started asking me that. Then I started Brandon's kind of trash can service. And so I would take all the old people's trash out. They give me money for that. And then next thing you know, I had two friends that also was friends of mine doing the same thing. So they would call my house on our phone, and I would go up there. That was kind of my first business. So I always kind of saw myself as entrepreneurial. In high school, I sold sneakers and CDs for money. And then in college, I was always also fascinated by cars, which is another component of what Buyable does. My dad bought a 66 Mustang, and so we used to work on that car growing up. And so kind of that led my passion for cars, and also had like a thing with being an entrepreneur in my early adolescent age. And then so when I go to college, I'm like, what do I want to major in? I was really fascinated with race car driving. I wanted to had this dream when I was younger of being a Formula One race car driver, but I'm really tall, so I couldn't fit in a race car. So the other option that I had when it goes to college is I could be a mechanical engineer, build drivetrains for Formula One cars. So I went to school for mechanical engineering, got a scholarship, and studied that. Halfway through college, I started getting into stocks. It was 2007, 2008 financial crisis. The stock market was everything. Everybody was talking about the stock market. I was fascinated by the stock market. I met a really prominent, a well-to-do guy in Nashville who made a lot of money in the stock market. So I started just deep diving, reading about it. I took some money that I had and saved up that I got from a refund from a scholarship and invested it into the stock market. And, I don't know if it was a matter of luck and some skill, but everything's going up, and I made a lot of money in the stock market in college. So word got out that, I was doing well with the stock market. I ended up managing my university's kind of investment portfolio. Opportunity to do that. That led me a lot of connections, which got me a job in investment banking. Kind of my path was a little all over the place. I switched my major at the time to economics and finance. So I ended up graduating with a degree, double majoring in economics and in finance. Worked in investment banking, doing M&A deals at Merrill Lynch, and then Bank of America Investments at the time, and they bought Merrill. I ended up having a friend of mine who used to work my car. So this is how I got back and took a tangent to the finance route, and then went back to kind of getting in my hands dirty in the automotive space. I had a friend of mine who worked was a mechanic, had a car lot, and there was a Ukrainian guy that owned a car dealership across the street from him. And so he wanted to, buy this dealership from him. So we put money together, bought the dealership there, and then that was back in 2012. And so I've been kind of operating and doing car brokering on the side from that point on. And so didn't like banking. I always wanted to help people financially. Originally I saw the stock market as a powerful tool to take people who didn't have much and turn it into something. I actually also started another group called Life Group Investments with a few friends of mine in college, kind of trying to help churches and small business invest in the stock market. When I got to kind of investment banking at Wall Street, it wasn't the same. You weren't really helping the little guy anymore. You're helping the big guy, right? And so that really didn't speak to me. So, I left that, did some kind of corporate strategy work and finance work at a few entertainment studios, moved back to LA where I'm from, doing studio work, finance, corporate strategy, transformation. I got my hands wet really full-time in entrepreneurship in 2017. So like, I've always been an entrepreneur. My plan was spend my 20s building my resume with, some big name brands on my resume. So that way, when I go into entrepreneurship, if I ever failed, I can always still get a job. So I want to establish myself at least in a corporate career standpoint, get exposure, also build savings. So, when I took that leap into entrepreneurship, I had a decent resume, I had some money saved up. I had a college friend of mine I was known as like the investment guy in the university. He was like the app guy. So he had an idea for a conference app. I went to a conference. I was using his app. I was like, man, I love this. How can I help? He's like, I'm trying to fundraise. I was like, I'll help you fundraise. I'm thinking that my experience in banking was relevant to venture capital. It is not, right? It was not. So I ended up moving. I quit my job, moved to San Francisco. We started this business. I'm thinking I'm trying to fundraise. We raised like $125,000, but I was like, I don't know anything about startups, anything about venture capital, but we got our hands dirty and we figured it out. We ended up iterating that business from a conference app to a few other ideas, but we really hit our stride when we became like a membership platform for bars, nightclubs, and restaurants. Got into a Y Combinator. That was a great experience for us. I learned a lot about startups.
That's quite a pivot.
Yeah. It was like, one of the things I learned about startups is that you have to pivot, learn very quick, pivot a lot. And it is also a pivot in life, right? Like I've had 3 careers, banking, kind of like corporate strategy, and then now like tech, right? Startup tech. They're not really relevant to each other, but always pivoting, trying to figure out what works. And so it was no different in startups. Always trying to figure out like solving a problem. We incur a problem. How do we solve this problem? Can we solve it? Do we have to pivot? And so that journey in that first business taught me a lot. Started as a conference app. One of the things we learned with the conference app that we had is that retention was terrible. So at the time we were kind of thinking about the app and from a data perspective. And the problem was we had a lot of people join our app during a weekend for a conference. But then after that conference happened, everybody would leave, right? And so no one would use it. So it was just dead. And we're like, man, how do we solve this problem of retention? We have, in a conference, no one really knows anybody. And our goal is to help people connect constantly and keep those connections thriving and going after they leave. And so like, okay, what also happens where new people get together, but they stay. And so we pivoted from conferences to universities. The new kids come together, they don't know each other, they want to connect, but they're not leaving after every weekend. They're there permanently, right? At least for the 4 years. So we pivoted from a conference app to a college app to help people connect nearby. That went really well. We had a lot of students join. We launched on a few campuses. Students joined, they were active, they were messaging and connecting with each other. But we're like, and how can we make money now? Because college kids don't have any money, right?
Right.
But at the time we're like, what is the one thing that college kids do spend money on? And that's going out. And so we were like, okay, we're talking to students, what do you spend money on? They're like, we like going out. What's the problem they have going out? The lines are really long, right? So we ended up building a app. We ended up building a feature in the app where you can basically pay money to skip the line. So it turned into like a skip the line app from that, right? So now you're in a long line trying to get to this bar. We had this dynamically priced thing to where depending on what the demand is for getting in the door, it'll spike the price up and down. And so
which market was this?
This is the college markets.
But
in markets
cities.
That we're launching, cities.
Yeah.
So we first tested this in Nashville, and then we went back home to the Bay Area. We were in San Francisco. So then we launched it officially in San Francisco. So that's kind of what was going on there at that point. So people were paying money to skip the line. And for the venue and promoters, it was a benefit because really, if you want to skip the line currently, you had to pay a doorman or like slide the bouncer some money, right? And the venues aren't really getting that money. And really, what we learned is that the venues weren't actively predicting the price to get in, right? They were saying like $20 to get in. The problem was like they only had so much capacity in a venue for that customer paying $20. So you had a long list of people who just didn't get in or had to wait in line for a very long time. And so we're like, hey, how do you optimize basically LTV for this customer? You have people in line who are willing to pay more than $20 to get into your venue, right? And so why not figure out what that price was? And so our tool helped the venue figure out what that equilibrium was at the time and during peak times. So that way you can make sure you get high value, high spending customers into your venue. And then for the customers who were willing to pay more, they were able to do that without the friction or like having a slide to bounce some money or like not figuring out how to way to get in there. So move that. And then eventually with that market, we want to stabilize revenue because it was very much like a weekend business, right? And also was very up and down. So how do we stabilize revenue? And then move to a higher clientele. So instead of focusing on kind of like low income college students, move to some higher income people in their 30s and 40s who are professionals. And so we ended up adding a membership layer on top now. So instead of dynamic kind of one pay as you go, we created a membership and targeting kind of really high end venues. So like the most popular restaurants, bars, and nightclubs in the venue, if you're like say you're 35, maybe you're married, have a relationship, and you just want to go out, you don't have to deal with the hassle of standing in line. You don't really know a lot of people because you don't have the social capital to just get into the club if you want to, right? But you also may not want to spend, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 on like a table, right? So you can become a member of this venue, right? Every single month, maybe you're paying $100. We let the venues kind of determine the price, but we'd work with them, kind of figure out what the right price strategy and the right perks were. And then they would pay a membership for that. That business did really well. That's what got us into the YC. So that pivot got us into Y Combinator. We went from earning $2,000 the first night we launched our business, doing almost $100K in revenue in about 6 months. And yeah, went through YC, great experience, and learned a lot. It was a difficult time starting that business because just a year later, the pandemic happened and shut down our entire business. So that, I took a lot of experience, hiring, raising some money, understanding how to pivot, building product, and most importantly, empathy, like how to understand what your needs, the values, the problems, and being really empathetic to the customer that you're solving the problem for, to really build something that they would love, right? And so I took that knowledge. We ended up bootstrapping another company called AutoDial. After that was, again, solving another problem for people. At the time during the pandemic, people were trying to get unemployment assistance and they couldn't get through to government phone lines. And we also had that problem because we had just had to fire ourselves in our own business. So we're like, how do we, one, get people that work for us unemployment assistance? And then how do we get ourselves like some pandemic unemployment assistance at the time? Because, we had to take care of the people that work for us and take care of ourselves. But we couldn't get through to the agency. So we built a call bot that does that for us. And we got through in minutes with our helping ourselves and helping people work for us, right? So we thought about how many other people need this, right? So we launched it. It was like $5 to $10. You would pay the bot $5, $10. It would get through for a customer, and you can get that unemployment assistance. And that helped tens of thousands of people who were like out of a paycheck, out of a job, got fired, had money on their accounts, but just couldn't get access to it because they needed an agent to help them unlock it, or maybe they had a password issue, or maybe they had, just some issue on their application that they needed to talk to somebody to get figured out. And so there's so many people that we help with that business. Again, like just going back to having empathy for your customer and how can you help them, right? And then now I'm thinking about what I want to do next. And that's where I got to Buyable.
What happened with that business? Was that the one that
AutoDial
ran Techstars for?
Yeah, no, this one. So AutoDial, we bootstrapped. We never took any outside capital for that. Yeah. That business is still running today. So you go to AutoDial.com if you need help getting in contact with any type of government employment agency, or just busy phone line, we'll get you through. But it's kind of on autopilot. And then Buyable came along. So Buyable came along a few ways. So one, I was reflecting. So how I got the idea for Buyable kind of was like all at one time. So I had a friend of mine, my old co-founder. He was like trying to get an apartment. He didn't have a very thin credit score, right? So there's guy told him, like, there's this company that will help you get an apartment if you look at your cash flow, right? And I was like, oh, that's very unique, right? At the same time, so I'm like, oh, that's a very unique way to like look at things beyond credit score and look at their cash flow to see if they can afford the apartment. If they could, they'll get you the apartment. That was really dope. So I was like, okay, that's a good idea. Same time, I'm also talking to my business partner at the dealership. He's telling me that 1 out of every 3 people are having issues getting financing. And so I'm like, that's in my mind. So I have like these 2 data points that I'm tracking. Then I'm started thinking about my car buying experience. I'm like, my first time buying a car was terrible. I had a thin credit score coming out of college, but it was a good one. It was like a 720, 730, but it was thin. I had a great job, plenty of money. So, but then I'm trying to buy my car and all they're looking at is my credit score. They're like, oh, you don't have enough credit history to take a chance on you. So I'm only getting these rates from banks for like 15%. So my first interest rate on my first car was terrible. And so I'm thinking about that experience. I'm like, man, that's still going on today. We're sitting at the dealership. I had this nugget of information when my friend told me this company used cash flow to get him approved for an apartment. I wonder if we could do something similar for that. And then why are banks doing that? So I went down this path of like understanding the needs of banks, like what methods they're using to do today, talking to people who are working at banks, talking to different dealerships if they have this problem, talking to customers. And that's kind of where we came up saying like, hey, I think we can solve the problem here with using data points that they're not even capturing. So that's kind of my journey to Buyable. And then we, built a product, had like an idea of an MVP. Before I even built it, my process of launching any business is first market research. So, hey, what are your needs? Like, what are you needing? Dealers are like, I just need a lender that will finance these deals, right? I need proper financing. Banks are like, I'm talking to lenders, they're like, we just need more data. Like with the credit score, if somebody doesn't have enough credit, we just don't have enough information to see if this person's a good risk or not. So we either decline that risk, which most prime banks do, or they have to offset the risk of unknown. That unknown, I don't have enough credit history to unknown. I start to offset that risk with higher pricing. And that's what subprime lenders do. It's like, we don't know whether you're a good risk or not. So we're going to charge 20% in case you are a bad one, right? We can still make our money and then offset that risk. And so I was like, okay, well, they need more data. Dealers want to close sales. And then for the consumers, it's very obvious. It's like, we just want an affordable car, an affordable note, right? And not have to worry about getting declined, which is kind of embarrassing as well, right? And then also they want transparency. So they want to know kind of what they can afford. They want to have trust and confidence, knowing that like when they're looking at a car, they go to a dealership, that there is somebody that can support them and back them financially when they do that. And so that was like the tough task that we had, but we came up with the idea of Buyable. And so what Buyable does is so when you're at a dealership and you're a customer trying to buy a car, the first thing we'll do is we'll look at your credit score. Depending on where your credit score is at, we'll then look at your finances. Once we understand what your finances are, and we do all this automated through APIs, so we use a bunch of different third-party services to get this data in detail. We'll create a loan for you based upon how much you can afford. So now there's no, like, we're not going to try to shove you into a loan or a payment that's like outside of your breadth. We take a low interest rate and we create a loan for you. The third thing that we do is our software looks at all the cars on that dealer's lot or within our dealership network, and then we curate the right cars for you. So there's no guesswork for you. We're taking the guesswork of like, is this car the right price? We already screened it to make sure it's the right price. If it's overpriced, we don't show it to you. We get it out of we curate only the cars at the good price that have low maintenance. So we don't want to get you into a car that you have to spend, $1,000 to maintain every single year. That have decent low depreciation. So not a car you're going to buy that's like $50,000 and next year's gonna be worth $30,000, right? That has a decent depreciation curve. Those are like the main metrics that we do for that. And then so once we curate those vehicles, it's a matter for the consumer just selecting that vehicle, drive the lot. The tricky part mechanically that we're making magic happen is how we get this low interest rate loan from a bank, right? And so what we do is we realize that banks have a lot of different needs. One of their key needs that a lot of lenders have is they're scrapping for customers with fintech companies, right? They have most of their customers are older and they want a younger consumer. Lending is a key way to get a younger customer. And so our solution enables them to get access to that younger consumer that they want to build a relationship with, right? So now they're able to offer that. There's also a lot of regulatory scrutiny they face when they don't do these type of loans from regulators. And so they spend a lot of time, money, and effort keeping regulators at bay, because they don't do, most of the prime banks we talk to don't do any first-time car buyer loans at all, right? Subprime dominates the space. And so now we're giving them a way to lend to first-time car buyers, but most importantly, not increasing their capital costs and capital reserves. When a prime bank who has low portfolio risk and low interest rate loans in their portfolio, when they do a high interest rate loan, they inevitably bring risk into that portfolio, which increases their kind of capital costs. And so with Buyable, they're able to do these type of loans, get a younger age consumer with less risk, so they're not increasing their capital costs.
Okay, I've got a basic
question that people might be wondering who don't have auto industry experience.
Yep.
Why is there so much risk if there's underlying collateral that's easy to repossess?
Yeah. So one, it's not necessarily easy to repossess. It can be a little difficult to repossess, but the collateral thing is like, the risk comes from lack of data and just we're using an old, outdated system. So you'd be surprised about the number of loans that are done where they don't verify any income or employment. They just kind of take your word for it, right? And so lenders are lending capital to people that they really don't know if they can afford it or not. I think the second thing is that they're not doing a lot of understanding of the vehicles. They're looking at the present value of the vehicle, right? But they're not necessarily forecasting and building models around what's the future value of the vehicle, what's the depreciation curve of the vehicle, what's the maintenance like of the vehicle.
So even if you repossess the collateral, the value of that collateral has moved in unpredictable ways that they haven't modeled.
Exactly, right? 100% right? They haven't modeled at all. And so with the beauty of our product is that we can model that out. And there's a lot of data now and APIs out there now that you can pull that data in and make sense of it. And so we use AI to make sense of all of this data around the vehicle, both in the short term and the long term. I think about it as like, as a dealer, our relationship with the car is 30 to 90 days. When you're a bank or a consumer, your relationship with the vehicle is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. If you're a bank, it's 5 to 6 years. And so our job and what our software does is it understands what the value of that vehicle, that collateral is going to be throughout the duration of the loan term to make sure that the consumer isn't underwater for a significant portion of the loan. A lot of lenders got in trouble in 2020, 2022, we're seeing these defaults, is because they overpaid for vehicles because they didn't understand not only the short-term value of a car, but the long-term value of a car. So if a person does default, you get this collateral, you think it's worth 30, it's worth 15.
Help me understand just the basic legal mechanics, and is it uniform across the United States? Mm-hmm. A buyer takes a loan out, mm-hmm. they get a car, mm-hmm. say they've made $10,000 worth of payments on it, and that's their equity in the car, but then they can't continue to make payments mm-hmm. on that vehicle mm-hmm. and it gets repossessed. Mm-hmm. What happens to the equity in their car in the event that there's repossession?
So if there's positive equity, then the bank pockets that positive equity, right? Now, it would be smart for the consumer to sell that car on their own. Like if you can't make the payment, you should sell that car on your own and get the positive equity. But sometimes that doesn't happen. So if there is positive equity in the car, the bank repossesses it and sells it at auction. They pocket the positive equity. And as Buyable, we're a partner in that, so we'd actually pocket some of the equity as well. Oftentimes, what happens is that there's not positive equity in the car. Or the thing about it is that like there's a market value, like the cash value of the car, and there's actually what you can actually get for it at auction, and that's typically a little bit lower. And so if you repossess the car, it's worth 20. The bank's not gonna be able to get $20,000 for that car at auction. They'll probably get 15 because the person that buy that car has to flip it for a profit, so they can't pay you market value for the car. So inherently that happens, and then also too, the way amortization schedules work, which just means like what's your payoff curve on the car, is that you're paying mostly interest the first couple of years. And so in the payment, and so you're really not paying down the principal to like the tail end of the car. So while you might have made $10,000 worth of payments in the first 2 years, half of that is towards interest alone. So you really only maybe paid down your principal $5,000.
In the lifetime of a new car purchase, mm-hmm. I guess it would probably be better for used car purchases, mm-hmm. but how long is the vehicle underwater?
So for a new car, typically like 2 to 3 years, depending on, right? And for a used car, a year and a half, right? It can be. That also depends on what you bought the car, like the price you bought the car at. So this is why we do a good job of curating vehicles, because if you bought a car that was overpriced already, and then you had a bunch of add-ons onto the car, right? So when you get into these kind of what you call high LTV loan to value situations, another thing that got a lot of lenders and consumers in trouble is that they had high LTV. So an example of this is the car is really worth 30, but you actually bought it for 35 because you didn't understand the market value of the car. Maybe the dealer wasn't budging on price or something like that, right? So you ended up overpaying $5,000 for the car. So the car's cash value, ACV, is 30, but you paid 35. And then there's also taxes and things like that on top of that thing, right? So maybe your out the door price for that car, when you include taxes, maybe you added, the dealer got you to do some warranties and some maintenance things on there. So now you've ended up paying $38,000 for this car. So the bank gave you a loan for $38,000 for the car. That's worth 30, right? $1,000 for the car. So now you're paying this car off. You're paying this $38,000 loan for this car worth $30,000. That car depreciates 20-30% the first year. So now it went from $30,000 in year one. I mean, by the end of year one, it's at $25,000, right? But you've only paid down that principal of $38,000 down to 35, right? So that's a huge delta. You have a $10,000 gap, right? Now by year two, you've paid it down to maybe, you paid that 35 down to maybe 32,000, 33,000. But that car's went from 25 to 20, right? The gap continues to grow until now towards the tail end, you can start paying a lot of that down. That's all interest you've been paying down in the beginning. And that's what got a lot of people in trouble, is first overpaying for the car. So the best way you can stop that kind of gap, depreciation underwater, is by first getting a good deal up front. Because once you've done a loan, you really can't control the depreciation of the car and what the loan amount is unless you overpay the loan. But yeah, so that's kind of what we do in the beginning, is one, just starting from the right point, getting a car that's fair value, and then make sure that we're not over lending on that car.
Very interesting. I've learned way more about cars and auto loans than I ever thought that I would need to know in my life.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take your Bible hat off.
Okay.
And let's put a personal consumer car buyer hat on. How do you buy cars? What do you look for? How do you negotiate? Would you ever buy a new car?
Yeah.
Where's the value? Like, break it out for us. Make me the world's best car consumer.
Okay, so one, I do not buy new cars. I've actually never bought a new car. I would lease a new car. If you wanted to get a new car, I would much rather lease it than buy it.
Corporate lease?
Yeah, especially if you can write it off, right? Okay. So if you're in a situation where, especially if you're like a 1099 wage worker, if you're looking at, I would either lease a brand new car or get a very cheap car on the used, right? But leasing, you can write the payment off, so it's a very viable option for people who can write the loan off. So if I'm getting a new car, lease, right? The other thing is that you take the maintenance stuff out of the equation, because a lot of leasing, they do all the maintenance for you included. So lease, but I typically buy used cars. The sweet spot is typically 3 years old, 40,000 miles, right? Is like a good time. After 3 years, the car's depreciation curve slope is really, really slanted. So it's not as high. You're kind of out of that high depreciation area of the car, which is great. It's still new enough to where you're not gonna have a lot of maintenance issues. You start seeing a lot of maintenance issues on cars between like 80 to 120,000 miles. You start seeing things break. So you're still kind of in a good space when you're like 30,000, 40,000 miles. So one, I try to identify those type of cars. Also, a lot of those cars just came off a lease. So if it's been a car that's been in a 3-year lease, it's being properly maintained. So now it's in the used market. It's appreciated enough. So I like to try to buy those cars.
Do you care if it's a fleet vehicle or if it's an individual lease? Is there any way for you to know?
Yeah, you can definitely know. Leases and fleets are still both very good. I think people they don't like rental cars, like fleet cars, but those are actually really well maintained cars. So I don't have a problem buying those type of cars. I think the ones I want to stay away from multiple owners. So if it was like 2 or 3 years old, have like 3 or 4 owners, that's a red flag. Any accidents, of course, right? But I look for single owner cars for sure. You don't want one that has multiple owners, because typically that means there might be something going on there that's, that you might not know. Why has the car's been bought and sold so many times and it's only a couple years old, is a red flag. I think the other thing is, and then you don't want to do anything crazy high mileage, but again, fleets and leases, I love. One owner's car, I love too.
How do you know if it was garage kept or not, and to what extent does that matter?
So I would say garage kept is important, especially depending on where where it's located, right? So like there are certain locations that I don't like buying cars from. So like New York is like rough on cars, right? Weather is bad, city driving, stop and go, right? I tend to not like to buy cars from places with like really severe weather. And then also it's very also city driving. So like Chicago, DC, New York, a lot of stop and go kind of traffic driving. It's not necessarily really good for cars. And then inclement weather.
What about like by seawater. Does that matter at all?
Could be. I mean, that type of stuff only affects older cars. So if I'm buying like an old car, 20 years old, then that can you have to worry to like rust issues, things like that. But for newer cars, not necessarily so much.
Okay.
I think the next thing that I try to do, so like those type of cars I look for, I think now it's like, how do you do a deal? What's the art of a deal at a dealership? I think you're also getting at. And so
what about private buyer?
Yeah.
Is that just too complicated, too much risk, too many variables?
Not really, to be honest. Private buyers, I don't mind because you get to really understand.
Private sellers.
Yeah, private sellers. Yeah, private sellers. I don't mind those, right? Because you get to go to the person's place, see how it was kept, see how it was maintained, right? Like you get a good feel for the type of owner that owned this car before. You don't really know when you're buying it from a dealer. You really don't know who the type of customer that owned that car before, because were they hard on the car, right? Like,
they're never going to tell you this guy is an asshole.
I know, but you kind of profile a little bit of a customer a little bit, right? Yeah. Like you're buying a car from like an 80-year-old, woman, that's, car is low, like you're pretty sure that she didn't do donuts in the car in a parking lot, right?
Right.
If you're buying a car from like, a 25-year-old, male, and it's like a high-powered car, you're pretty sure you drove that car pretty hard, right? So you can get a better feel for the type of person that owned the car before. And how, kind or not. So those are the type of things you can do. I think the other thing is just like, so once you kind of figured out the car, 3 years old or lease, low mileage, been properly maintained, one owner, see the maintenance history, pull the Carfax. Most dealers will give you that. Now, so how do I get out of here with a good deal? So you can go on like Kelley Blue Book, things like that, to kind of understand what the market is for the vehicles. You can also go onto some of the other websites and kind of see in your area, what is the market value? What are these sales happening, like the market price for this car? So at least you have a baseline. A lot of times just doing research online, dealers have tricks they can do. So some dealers purposely put the cars at a very cheap price on like Auto Trader or Car Gurus. We're really not gonna be able to get that price, because they're gonna, when they come in, like, oh, that price is not longer, or it can be tricky looking at market prices.
Hidden fees.
100%, right? It can be very tricky understanding what the market price is, but again, you want to at least get a baseline to see what things are priced at. The art of the deal, though, is one, never tell them what you're looking to pay monthly. When they ask you, like, what's your monthly payment you're looking for? Don't say that. Answer that question, because we're trying to box you in. We're trying to create a box, understanding what your payment is, what your loan term is. We can create a deal for you that seems good to you, but mechanically you're paying a lot of interest. You're probably overpaid for the car. If you look at what you actually paid over the lifetime of the car, you probably paid like, if you're trying to buy a $30,000 car, you probably paid $40,000, $50,000 for it on payment. So the thing that I do is I focus on out the door price, and that's the terminology you want to use, out the door price. I'm trying to get which payment do you want to use? I'm not really focused on payments. I really just care about the out the door price, and I want the out the door price. If I'm looking at a car that's say like $42,000, I'm like, hey, I want to get this car out the door 40. How can we do this deal? And so we'll be focusing on the out the door price. The out the door price is going to include taxes, titling, any fees, any documentation. So you can know exactly what your total price is, not the list price on the car. So out the door price is what you need to focus on, and focus on only. They're going to ask you questions like down payment. Don't answer that question either. When they say, hey, do you have any down payment you want to put money down on the car? I'm like, I don't know yet, but I just want to focus on the outdoor price. We can get that price to a reasonable amount. Then we could talk maybe if I want to put money down or not, talk about that, right? Again, redirecting back to out the door price.
So when they hear you talking about this, they're thinking, shit.
Yeah. They're definitely thinking shit, right? And so, hey, I want to focus on the out the door price. Then we could talk about payment. We could talk about down payment. We could talk about trade-in. Do you guys, another question, do you have a trade-in? Not really looking at, I don't know yet, right? I just want to talk about the out the door price, see if we get the out the door price down, and then you can talk, because trade-ins, the down payments, monthly payments, those are levers that we can pull, again, that we can move, like financially engineer to where it makes it seem like you're getting a good deal, but we're really making a ton of money on the deal as a dealer, and you're really not getting a good deal on the back end. It just feels like one, right? If you say you have a $500 monthly payment you want to get to, cool, we can make that $500 monthly payment work, right? But we're going to a lot of money down. We're going to probably undervalue your trade-in, like we're going to get that money from somewhere, right? We're going to charge high interest rates on the back end. It's just, there's so many different mechanics that we can pull. So again, focus on out the door. Anytime they ask you a question, trade-in, down payment, What's your monthly payment? Don't really care about that type of stuff. I just want to focus on out the door price.
Out the door price. Okay.
So now once you get the out the door price to a number that you're comfortable with, and again, I love out the door price because it includes all of any type of fees, right? Now we can start talking about down payment, trade in, right? Now it's like, okay, cool. I got the out the door price at this. What's the payment going to be? They're like, oh, payment's going to be, $600, right? What interest rate are you talking about, right?
Should you ever finance through the dealership?
This is the hack, and dealers hate this, and probably hate that I'm going to say this, depending on what they're saying, but yes and no. So how I tend to do deals is I will to get the out the door price down even further, is one of the tricks I would use is saying that I will use your dealership financing for that, because if I use dealership financing, they might cut the out the door price down because they're going to make money on the back end with the financing, right? And so they're like, oh, okay, cool. Well, hey, you know what? I'll actually maybe if I can save another $1,500 out the door on this deal, I'll use your financing, right? They're like, okay, they're actually, what's your credit? If my credit's great. I'm like, my credit's great. They're like, okay, cool. But let's do that. I'll actually lower the out the door price down to this and use our financing. Cool. Handshake deal. Let's get it done. Comes back. Interest rates of the deal are going to be a little bit higher a lot of times, right? But I'll say that I'll use your financing, and I will. We'll use the financing. They'll get the deal done, and then I'll refinance it with a much lower. I mean, you want to make sure that they don't have any prepayment penalties, right? And things like that. But I would always recommend you saying that you're going to use a dealership financing, because you will be able to get a better out the door price for that car, for sure. And then you can always, even if you're a cash buyer, because dealers don't make money off cash buyers that they would off finance buyers, I would still, if I know I'm going to pay this car $40,000 cash, I would still go in there saying I'm going to use your financing, and then use their financing and get that lower deal, and then still pay it off. But again, make sure there's no prepayment penalties. We actually just bought a car recently, did this whole trick.
Where is the fine print related to the prepayment penalty?
Ask them.
Okay.
Yeah, I would ask them. Dealers make money on the back end with financing off what we call dealer reserves. So when a lender, we work with lenders. So one of the beauties about Buyable that's friendly to dealers is that we only work with lenders that the dealerships we work with, that we target work with, right? So the way Buyable works is we partner with the bank. The bank already has existing business deals with the dealerships, and so we work with those dealers. Dealers hate outside financing. So if you bring in a financing partner that we don't work with, we don't like that, because we're not going to make any money off that financing. Every dealer has a deal with a bank that they work with where they get a few
spread.
A few basis points on that, 25, 75, 100 basis points on that loan. So that's long-term revenue they can make on that deal. If you bring outside financing, we don't like that. The other thing is, if you're a cash buyer, we don't like that either, because we're only going to make money on the margin of the car, which means that it's going to be harder for you to negotiate a better price for that car if you're a car buyer, if you're bringing outside financing, or a cash buyer. So I always recommend a negotiation tactic is to say you're going to use their financing. Yeah.
And then immediately refinance as long as there's no
prepayment penalties.
Prepayment penalties. Okay.
Yeah.
A few other questions. I've heard before that if you can find a way to identify how long a car has been on a lot, then they will be more motivated to lower the outdoor price.
Yeah.
How do you figure that out, and is that true?
Yeah. There's a few ways, right? One, you can ask them, hopefully they don't lie, right? But you can ask them, how long has this car been on the market? A lot of times you can see on their website. Well, their website won't tell you, but you can see how the car, a lot of times people find cars from a third party, Car Gurus, Auto Trader, Cars.com. Those websites will tell you how long it's been listed, right? And so you can go on there and say, this car has been listed for 75 days online. That is this car is not moving. They want to move it, because dealers have something called a floor plan, where when they buy a car, when a dealer buys a car from an auction or somebody, they don't actually pay cash for that car. They actually finance that car. So they're actually, every 30 days, every month that car sits on that dealer's lot, they have to make a finance charge to pay a lender. So they basically have a line of credit from some lender, and they use that line of credit to buy this car that they want to have on the lot. So the car is worth $30,000. I buy the car for $30,000. They're actually financing that car for $30,000. So every month they're paying $500 a month to some lender to finance that car. That means they're losing money every month that car is on their lot. So the longer it's on the lot, the more money they're losing, the more likely they are to want to move it to bring something fresh in, because they might have already lost all their margin in the car, right? And so, yeah, I love finding cars that have been sitting around. I've done that plenty of times where I've seen a car, I might go to a dealer and be like, talk about this car, they don't want to make a deal at all. Come back a few weeks later, still there. Hey, you want to make okay. I'm like, hey, I'll give you $20,000. I don't want to do 20. I'm doing 25. I'm like, okay. Come back a month later, 20, still there. Come back another month later, still there. I'm like, now I'm offering you 19 for it. Do you want to sell it? Aggressive.
I like
exactly, right? Like now I want to offer you 17.5 for the car, right? Because I know you're going in the hole and no one wants it. It's not moving. You priced it too high. So now I'm even going to lowball you even more, and eventually they're going to have to cave in, right? As a dealer, you should only hold a car for like maybe 30 to 60 days. But by 90 days, you just sell the car for whatever price you can get for it and just bring fresh inventory in. But yeah, it's just bad discipline on a lot of dealers. But yeah, if it's been on the lot for a few days, great.
Okay. In terms of value so there's perceived value in different features in a car, and then there's realized value. So humans are not rational. And when we do an analysis of market location of where people live, people way overvalue the coast and being able to see the ocean relative to the standard of living that they're able to obtain with salary, cost of living, housing, all of that.
Yep.
With cars, do people overvalue performance, how fast it goes? Like, do people really ever drive it like they do in the car commercial?
Yeah.
And so they have this ego caught up in, I've got a V8, blah, 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 the cylinder, this turbo. And then it's like, they drive it from home to work.
Yeah.
And they want seat heaters and an AC that works.
Yeah.
Where do buyers go wrong where their ego gets involved and it doesn't actually impact their human utility? And then is there a preference in your mind between sedans, SUVs, vans, trucks? I mean, obviously, if you're a construction worker or something like that, truck makes sense. If you have a bunch of kids, a van makes sense. But just in general, how do you think about best consumer value?
So when it comes to consumer value and value of the cars and stuff like that, and not only the present but future value of the cars, it's very market dependent. So it depends on the market that you're in, right? So place like Texas values trucks, right? They love pickup trucks. So a lot of trucks are being sold in Texas. It's good for new trucks, right? Because if you're a brand new truck, they tend to be a little bit overpriced because there's so much demand for them. But then the market gets flooded on the used market, so they depreciate a lot faster in Texas, right? So your truck is not worth as much as in California, whereas there's not a lot of demand for trucks, new trucks in California. Say you're in LA, right? So they have to do a lot more deals to sell trucks. But on the used market, they hold their value a little bit more locally in California because there's not as many, right? So there's that. Also if you're in snowy areas, 4-wheel drive valued, right? Whereas 4-wheel drive no one cares about 4-wheel drive in Florida, but they will in Minnesota, right? So there's features like that. Heated seats, heated steering wheel up north, very valuable feature. Down south, not so much, right? Maybe cooled seats. Sunroofs tend to be very valuable no matter where your car is at. So if you can spec one with a panoramic roof or sunroof, that's tend to be a valuable feature in most areas. SUVs are definitely more valuable to consumers these days than cars and sedans are. Sedans are kind of a lost thing, especially coupes. Coupes, they don't sell at all like that. So I would say SUVs tend to be in more demand, which is they are higher sales volume. When you talk about high performance cars, those are very niche markets. So niches tend to do very well when it comes to value, because I would say the average person really doesn't care about high performance cars and high horsepower cars, but those are very niche products anyways. So the type of people who actually care about that type of stuff tend to place a lot of value on them. I'm one of those people where if it doesn't have more than 500 horsepower, I really don't like it. So I tend,
because you're a gearhead.
I'm a gearhead, right? So I tend to value driving experience. I tend to value manual cars. I tend to value V8s. I tend to value, certain engine types on certain models, right? So for that market is still pretty strong if you have a high horsepower car because it's a niche. And there's certain specs in certain areas that get that, but that's not very common, right? You do want to stay away just in general from like crazy colors, which is why you start to see a lot of black, whites, and grays, because like the market for a yellow car is very, very niche, right? It's supposed to be very hard if you do want to sell that car to sell it. And if you sell it to a dealer, they're going to give you less money for it. Certain interior combinations, right? Like you have like a blue car with a red, like if you have like a baby blue car with a red interior, like that's going to be so you start like doing some very unique specs to a car. It can kind of change the value of it, but it really depends on the market size. So I would just say, stay away from things that can be too niche or too unique per se. And then, coupes, not so much. Yeah.
Should you fix your car before you sell it?
Yeah.
And also, before I forget, should you do the dealer trade-in, or should you go through the rigmarole of trying to sell it on the private market for a higher price?
Yeah.
And ultimately, it depends on what's the cost of your time.
Yeah, exactly.
But how do you think about it?
I would say you don't. So whether it's a dealer sale or private market, you don't want to go underwater, right? So in your car. So if you're underwater in your car, if you have a deal between going underwater and not going underwater in your car, I would always go in the way that has not underwater. Now, if no matter what the dealer is offering you or the private market is offering you, you're not gonna be underwater in your car. I would just say from simplicity, easy use standpoint, I would just try to go dealer trade in, right? I mean, that can be easy. And also you can use that as a token. If you've leveraged the out the door price as low as you can go, then you can add in like, oh, I'm also gonna trade a vehicle in. So like, what can we do now, right? They might actually knock down a little bit more. But to me, I've always kind of enjoyed I don't like, it can be kind of difficult to sell a car, right? People coming in, looking at it, So yeah, when it comes to fixing it before selling it, depends on how much you have to do a kind of a cost benefit analysis, right? So like, say if broken cars don't go for much, right? And so if it's an older car, it might not be worth fixing it because it's already fully depreciated. So like fixing it's not gonna get you that much money. If it's a newer car, for sure. So like if your car is 3 years old or 4 years old, it's broken, you want to fix that car, because the difference between like a 3-year-old car that's broken versus fixed can be like $10,000 difference, right? Whereas like in a very older car, it might be like $1,000 or $2,000 difference. So it might not be worth it. The thing that you should always do is have a clean car, because cleaning a car might cost you $200 to get it shampooed and detailed, but it can actually add $1,000 of perceived value. So I'm shocked by the number of people who try to sell a car privately and it's just not clean at all. The other thing is you don't ever want to buy a car that's dirty, because you can hide a lot of flaws in a car you're selling by having it dirty and or maybe selling it at night. I want to buy a car in the daytime, when it's clean, so I can see if there's dents, if there's scratches, so I would say if you're always clean your car to sell it, you can probably get a little bit more from it. It looks better. I'll never buy a dirty car.
What's the most hostile, contentious negotiation tactic that a buyer can use that could work, though it may feel uncomfortable for people to do it? Such as you follow all of your current advice. It's all about the out the door price. You're going to use their financing. We're going to use all these best practices. But I've heard some people say you get them down to where you negotiated every dollar and cent, and then you say, hey, actually, you know what? I'm going to walk off this lot if you don't lower it 1,000 more or like 500 more.
Yeah.
Does that type of behavior work? And one time I heard a story about somebody that drove to Kansas from Oklahoma to look at a car, and then they walked off the lot because they wouldn't lower it like an additional 500 or 1,000. And then on their way home, they called them and said, okay, we'll do it.
Yeah.
Do those theatrics work?
Yeah, they can. I would say that in negotiating any deal, cars or whatever, my dad spent his, later half of his career, 20 years negotiating deals. He always told me, never be afraid to walk away from a deal, because that's the last thing that you have, right? Like you have to not be afraid to walk away from the deal. And so, yeah, if you got the price down, but you better not be bluffing if you don't like this deal, right? Like using it as a bluff can be dangerous, because they can say nah, and then you're kind of now you're without a car. You did all this work to negotiate the deal. You don't have the car that you want. If you got the price down comfortable to a price you're willing to pay it. Trying to play games to get it down further, right? could come back to bite you if you're not willing to walk away from it and if you don't have another deal lined up. So I tend to try to find a few cars that I'm interested in. So that way, if I don't find the deal that I want, I'll walk away from it and be okay with it because I know it's not a deal that I was comfortable with, right? So understand kind of what your number is, and like if we can get it down to this, you feel comfortable buying and don't play games. I think doing that, like that scenario you gave where the guy drove to Kansas to like buy a car, it's a tough thing to do to walk away from that deal because as a dealer, if you've driven that far to look at this car, it must be very unique and specific. So I innately as a dealer have a little bit of leverage. So if you say I'm going to walk away with this deal, like, oh, you spent all this time, money, and effort to drive out here to look at this car just to walk away. We can find something that works, but like you threatening me, you're going to walk away from this deal is not. I'm not
credible.
Yeah, it's not. I don't find it very credible. So I'll play a little hardball back, right? Like with you. I would say just again, the most hostile thing you can do to answer your question is walking away from the deal. Like just not what I wanted. If we can get it out to 1,000 and 1,000 more, great. But my number is this. And if we can't do it, then I have other things to look at. I've walked away from deals like that all the time.
One of the things that you said that you do is you find 3 or 4 different cars that you would be okay with purchasing. Mm-hmm. So say I'm trying to buy a Ford Fusion.
Yeah.
Very standard car all over the place. Negotiate each one of them down as much as you can. And then at some point, do you try to pit them against each other?
You can. I've seen people RFP cars. They've literally sent out a like request for proposal saying like, this is my price, this is whatever, send it out to dealers and have them bid back what they would offer, right? Like, what's the lowest price, right? To kind of do that and pit. So you can do that. I've done that sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully in the sense of like thinking you can get a better price at another place because you got a good, like I've gotten a good out the door price for a car at one place. Go to another place, see if I can get them to beat that out the door price. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't, right? Sometimes they'll match it.
Can a consumer ever get away with lying, saying that the dealer down the road will do one price and then they won't actually do that price? Like, would the dealers ever call each other to be like, screw this guy? Or
the thing, what dealers will do is they'll look around and see what the list price of the car is, right? And so what you could do, so like they'll call your bluff and say, do you have paperwork to prove that, right? Because what they will do is every dealer's going to look at the market as well and say like, hey, these other dealers that I have around have these cars listed at this price. So I'm not going to go below that. And the only way they will go below that is if you show them paperwork that you have a better deal, right? Because most of the time, if you have a handshake deal with a dealer and like they'll give it to you in paperwork. They'll say like, okay, here's the price that we can negotiate. Here's the deal that we have. You can take the paperwork to another dealer and say, here's what I got. Can you beat it? Most of the time they'll say we can match it.
So in general, who lies more, the buyer or the dealer?
The dealer, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that's the reputation, but whenever one of your friends from high school or something starts selling cars, then they post about it on Facebook all the time. And I remember one time I read where someone had a stat that like car buyers actually lie more in the negotiation. I thought, is that true?
Yeah.
Let me ask Brandon.
I don't think so. I don't think most car buyers are sophisticated enough to know how to lie their way around around a deal. Whereas like a dealer does this every single day. So they know what to say to get a deal across the table, right? Like, people buy cars once every 5 years, right? So like you're not super well versed in knowing how to navigate around a deal and lying about it. So I don't think most consumers are sophisticated enough to do that.
What percentage of people show up on a lot that are prepared to negotiate like a shark, that like have your knowledge versus just an average Joe? I need a car.
It's probably like 1 out of every 10, maybe even less than that.
And from the dealer's perspective, how easy is it to identify the shark?
Not very easy, to be honest, not very easy.
Because they're good at hiding it.
Well, it's just because there's really nothing you can, so like there's some basic profiles, like women typically don't get good deals as men do, right? Because negotiation can be uncomfortable, right? And it can be very confrontational. And so, typically a woman's appetite isn't as high for that type of confrontation, for that. So, typically if a dealer sees a woman walk on the lot, they're probably more like thinking that he can take advantage of this situation than that. Also, but I think that what happens when it comes to a deal is that like they ask probing questions to kind of see where you lie, right? And so they know like if they can, like if I ask you, like, what you looking a month, what you looking to pay every single month? If you answer that question, they already kind of know, okay, cool, this guy doesn't have a lot of experience negotiating car deals, right? Because a person who's well-versed negotiating deals won't answer that question. You know, that's the first question they're going to ask you is like, how much you looking to pay every single month, right? If you answer that question, they're already going to box you in like, okay, we got first thing answered, right? Are you looking to put any money down or a trade-in value? You say, yeah, and then a second question answered, right? That's like, we've already getting like as a dealer, am I already getting to a deal that I'm going to make a lot of money off of, right? What kind of car are you looking for? You know, what's the price? Like, you know, like there's these type of things they're going to ask you to kind of create a deal for you. So I think if you start, when they ask these type of questions, you start answering them, they already kind of know that you're not going to be a shark. A shark's going to come in there like, I'm out the door price. I don't care about any of that type of stuff. What's you know, can we get this out the door price down to this?
Brandon, that's all the time that we have today for this episode. I could talk for hours more about
cars,
how to buy a car.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not a gearhead, but I do always want to get a good deal in any negotiation that I participate in. But it really seems like your work with Buyable could be transformative for the car buying experience for first-time buyers and transform the experience for dealers and banks looking to work with the best possible data. So can't wait to see where you take the business, and excited to continue to work with you in the pipeline process with Cortado. And hopefully next time we meet, you will be a funded founder part of our portfolio.
We'll love that.
All right.
Thanks, Cody.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.